Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Maybe the facility you manage could establish new revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services. Cart King International can be the answer to your needs. Cart King is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile coffee, food, and retail carts and kiosks. Cart King has been working with clients and corporations across North America for 20 years, providing innovative designs, custom manufacturing, and timely delivery. Carts and kiosks are fun, and so are the dozens of designs on our website. Please visit us today at www.cart-king.com or just call us at 1-877-986-7771 and get your sales rolling.
PureSoapFlakes.com, 218-568-2525. Have you ever heard of Castile Soap? Pure Soap Flake Company handcrafts fine soap bars, laundry powder, and concentrated soap flakes using organic vegetable oils from their northern Minnesota facility. Bathe your body and wash your clothes with Pure Soap products that are free of fragrance, GMOs, palm oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, and synthetic additives. Keep it clean, folks. Pure Soap Flake Company products are kind to living creatures and sensitive skin, safe for drains and waterways, and work great in high-efficiency washers and top and front-loading machines. Order today at PureSoapFlakes.com or give them a call, 218-568-2525, 218-568-2525. Pure Soap Flake Company is a proud member of the Handcrafted Soap and Cosmetic Guild. Is your credit in bad shape? Do you need a new car? Ready to buy a new house? You want to rent an apartment? Are you going to apply for a job? Any one of these activities, they're going to ask for a credit report and then check out your credit score. Let Dynamic Solutions 2 erase your negative credit remarks. They offer a life-changing, dynamic financial solution. The finest in fast, professional, affordable credit repair. They have affordable monthly prices. They accept Visa, MasterCard, PayPal options available. You go to www.dynamicsolutions2, that's the number 2.com, or call 424-888-2820. Now, if you enter promo code ED or you mention Ed Opperman, you get a 10% discount. How's that? You get a free consultation, all negative items removed, get back in positive credit position. Dynamic Solutions 2, life-changing dynamic financial solutions.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. Finally, I am your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. And this show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. And now, if this is the first time you're listening to this show, please do me a favor and go to oppermanreport.com and check out the member section. We have all kinds of exclusive content on there that have never been played before live on any live station before, and you can check it out by becoming a member of the Opperman Report. It helps support the show because especially when you got a rough week, got a lot of expenses, and that's what keeps us going here. Okay, so really appreciate all the members out there who help support the show. Tonight, we got a big show. It's the untold story of the Falcon and the Snowman. And our guest tonight is author Vince Font, and he's the author of the book American Sons, The Untold Story of the Falcon and the Snowman. You can find the book on the Opperman Report, blogspot.com. There's a link to all his books on there. He has 3 books on there. And also, too, you can find it in the OppermanReport.com bookstore. So, Vince, are you there?
I am here, Ed. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for being so patient. I had a little scramble, a little live radio, a little tragedy there, but we got through it. So, Vince, tell us about yourself.
Peter Boyle once famously said, it happens to the best of us.
Oh, well, then it happens to the worst of us, too, then. Okay. All right, man. So tell us about yourself. Who is Vince Font?
Vince Font is, I'm not going to speak myself in the third person, although I often write in the third person. I'm a freelance journalist and a freelance writer. I've been working freelance completely self-employed for 5 or 6 years with a long history of technical writing before that. I've been a writer all my life, except just recently I've been given an opportunity to write about a subject that really speaks to me, and that's the book that we're talking about tonight, the American Sons, The Untold Story of the Falcon and the Snowman. It's a book that was essentially, when I came into it, it had been about 12 years in the making, and I kind of ushered it along to a quicker completion. And if just in case nobody's familiar with the book itself, it operates something as a sequel to The Falcon and the Snowman, the movie made famous in 1985 with Timothy Hutton and Sean Penn. Played a couple of guys who in the 70s who got caught up in selling secrets to the Soviet Union and ultimately were captured and sent to prison for a very long time. A lot of people don't know the rest of the story that follows that, and American Sons is pretty much the sequel that catches everybody up on what happened to the guys after the cell doors closed on them.
Yeah, to prepare for this show, I watched the movie again, because I love that movie.
Yeah.
First of all, I had no idea that these guys broke out of prison and stuff. I had no idea about any of that.
Well, just only one of them broke out of prison.
Yeah.
Christopher Boyce, a.k.a. the Falcon, played by Timothy Hutton in the original movie. Around about 1985 was when the movie came out, and I read the book. Just kind of really fascinated by the story. And then I looked in the school library and I saw that there was a sequel, both books written by journalist Robert Lindsey. Sequel was called Flight of the Falcon. And I found out that Christopher Boyce had escaped from prison and was, a fugitive for 19 months before the authorities finally caught up with him. That was a really fascinating book. And at the time there was talk about making that into a sequel movie, because the original Falcon and the Snowman, which was directed by John Schlesinger, was a really big hit and critically acclaimed. And Timothy Hutton, as you know, was a huge star at the time. And it ended up not getting made principally because of the fact that Timothy Hutton was not interested in reprising his role, because he heard that Christopher Boyce had not been involved in the writing of the Flight of the Falcon book and sort of was not on board with them making a sequel to the movie. So to his credit, Timothy Hutton was a very loyal individual, I suppose you could say.
That's interesting. I don't want to get too far away from the original story, too, because I'd like you to tell the original story for people who didn't see the movie. But another thing I found fascinating was that Sean Penn hired the other guy.
Yeah.
When he got out of prison.
Yeah, Andrew Daulton Lee. The thing about it is, when these actors, especially guys like Timothy Hutton and Sean Penn, when they prepare for a role like that, they immerse themselves in it and they go to the lengths of actually meeting the person. I know that Timothy Hutton spent a lot of time interviewing Christopher Boyce, and Sean Penn did the same thing with the character he portrayed, Andrew Daulton Lee. So that when it came to be that Andrew Daulton Lee was released from prison, Sean Penn gave him his first job as some sort of a assistant or something like that. But to my understanding, he didn't work long with Sean Penn. It was just sort of the next step in getting employment after being released from prison.
Okay. How did you get involved with these guys?
Interestingly enough, my wife and I used to do an internet radio podcast back in the early 2000s. It was for a Canadian progressive rock station called the Dividing Line Broadcast Network, and we had a little show called Progopolis, and we'd occasionally play musical genres that were outside of the progressive rock element. And one of my favorite soundtracks of all time has always been the soundtrack to The Falcon and the Snowman, which was written and recorded by Pat Metheny and Lyle Mays. And in 2010, it was the 25th anniversary of the release of that movie and the soundtrack. And since I'd always been such a fan of it, I played the entire album on the show, and just expressed the opinion that album was one of the few examples of an album that was better than the movie for which it was written, because I always thought that The Falcon and the Snowman could have been a lot better, and it kind of aged poorly, whereas the music did not age. Couple of weeks after that broadcast, I got an email in my inbox, and it was from somebody named Cait Mills, and she basically said, "I agree with your assessment. The movie was terrible. The music was great." And I emailed her back and I said, "Well, thank you for listening. You know how you do." And I said, "Are you any relation to Christopher Boyce?" And she said, "Yes, I'm his wife." Now, at this point, I was not aware that Christopher Boyce had been released from prison. So I was a bit shocked at that. And I thought, well, I got a lot of reading to catch up on. So I Googled
Okay, looks like we're picking him right back up, though. Who knows how long he's been talking, though. Sometimes you don't realize that you dropped your connection, and you keep talking. A couple of websites. One is for the book called The Falcon and the Snowman.com. Vince has a blog called www.vincefont.com. His Twitter is @VinceFont. Hey, okay. You had left off saying that you ran into his wife, you sent her an email, then you started researching the story once again.
Yeah, exactly. And essentially what happened was that we became friends on the internet and, on Facebook like you do.
Yeah.
I had not been aware that Christopher Boyce had been released from prison, much less that he'd been married and all these kinds of things. So it was kind of a surprise to me. Cait had apparently read some short stories that I'd written at the time, and she decided that she wanted to work with me on a book that she had been considering for quite some time. Initially, the book was to be told from her perspective. She's the parole advocate who petitioned for the release of Andrew Daulton Lee and Christopher Boyce. And after Christopher Boyce's release, they were married. And it was going to be a book from her perspective. And it evolved into
wait.
Big project.
Cait met Chris because she worked for the parole board or something like that?
She was a parole advocate who, in around about 1980, she began representing Andrew Daulton Lee for release from prison.
Okay.
And, it was a 20-year process. And in that process, she also came to know Christopher Boyce because essentially she was doing all she could to research the story. And she and Chris became friends. So ultimately, after Andrew Daulton Lee was successfully achieved parole, she moved on to, focusing her efforts on seeing what she could do to help out Christopher Boyce. And on his release from prison, they were married.
Okay.
Which was something very interesting. The way the story developed, and we, it's pretty well documented in the book American Sons, which is strangely, it's not a political book considering the crime that Christopher Boyce and Andrew Daulton Lee committed to get them behind bars, which was the crime of espionage.
Yeah. Now, do you think that Christopher was solely motivated by altruistic motives that he felt the government was doing wrong?
I believe so. I've had conversations with him because, we've become good friends. And in the process of writing the book, I interviewed him extensively. And, I asked the question, I said, if you had it to do all over again, would you do it? And his answer, of course, is, well, no, considering that he had to spend 25 years in prison. But he also has been posed the question, because initially the reason why the reason he states is why he sold secrets to the Soviet Union was because he decided to wage sort of something of a one-man war against the United States government. This was at a time, 1974, he was working as a telex operator for TRW, the aerospace contractor. And like you saw in the movie, which was very accurate, up even to the point of people making daiquiris in the shred bins in this highly secretive black vault where he and his coworkers worked. There were misdirected telex messages that were supposed to be directed at Langley, Virginia, CIA headquarters, that were incorrectly sent to the TRW telex machine. And by reading this, he discovered that the CIA was involved in essentially trying to oust the Whitlam regime in Australia. This was something that, to hear him tell it, he was very disturbed by, to say the least. And yet at the same time, it was nothing that he felt that he could go to the press with or anything like that, because A, he thought that he would be disbelieved, and B, he was not exactly certain that going to somebody in the press would accomplish anything other than maybe getting him in trouble. So ultimately, he made the enormous, what I consider to be the enormous mistake of sort of taking that anger and frustration out by saying, that he had access to these spy satellite plans and getting together with his sort of ne'er-do-well friend, Andrew Daulton Lee, who was a guy who was, a small-time drug dealer. And they sort of joined into a partnership where Daulton Lee went to the Soviet embassy in Mexico and made contact with the KGB and began passing documents to them in exchange for money. So I don't consider it to be an altruistic type of gesture to sell secrets to ultimately what is an enemy state. But at the same time, the guys being, 22, 23 years old, I'm not exactly certain that what they were doing was something that they quite understood.
In the movie, they kind of make it look like they were only successful like 3 or 4 times passing this stuff over to the Soviets. In real life, how long was it going on?
It was going on from 1974 until their arrest in 1977. So the movie took, obviously liberties with sort of condensing timelines and things like that. But it was something that was going on for about 2 or 3 years.
What about that scene where they showed Daulton jumping over the wall to get into the Russian embassy for that party? That couldn't possibly be real.
As far as I know, unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to. Never had the pleasure of talking to Andrew Daulton Lee. But as far as I know, these are things that actually occurred. Needless to say, there was a lot of license taken with characters and condensing timelines and things like that. But he was one of only 2 people known in American history to be able to enter undetected by the U.S. government into a Soviet embassy, and the other one was Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, the same embassy too.
Yeah. And it was the story itself. Christopher Boyce was actually consulted during the writing of the script. And so a lot of the stuff that you see in the movie actually happened, which was kind of a shock for me to learn, because you watch a movie and you think most of it has just been Hollywoodized. But a lot of the stuff actually went down the way it went down.
Even all that stuff about like them getting like practically abducted and had guns pulled on them by the Russians.
Yeah, Andrew Daulton Lee was right before Andrew Daulton Lee's arrest in 1977. I think what happened was that the KGB sort of got tired of him. I believe at some point they felt that the information that they were being passed was really not as valuable as they initially thought it was, a dead project, and they were just trying to get rid of him. He was abducted by sort of the Mexican secret police and beaten within an inch of his life, and in essence told, "Don't ever come back here again," and handed over to American authorities who were waiting for him. And shortly after that, Daulton Lee implicated Christopher Boyce, and they were both arrested and tried. They were tried separately, but Christopher Boyce, on his arrest, cooperated fully with the authorities. In other words, told them everything everything that he had given the Soviet Union, and received a 40-year sentence for espionage. Andrew Daulton Lee received a life sentence. Now, when you watch the movie and you see the credits roll and you see that, you think, well, these guys are, they're never getting out of prison. And to think that within 20, 25 years, they were granted parole is something of a, I guess, a miracle for them that it ever happened.
How did they manage to pull that off?
A lady by the name of Cait Mills.
Wait a second, because even before they got the parole, the other one, Boyce, escaped from prison.
He escaped, yes.
Right, so now wait a minute. Why didn't he have extra charges for escape? This guy got some deal. Now, 25 years, it's no joke, but it's still not a bad deal. Treason and escape.
Well, he was never. He was not to split hairs, but he wasn't actually convicted of treason. There was a difference between treason and espionage.
Oh, espionage, okay.
But a lot of people consider what he did to be treasonous, but that doesn't mean he was actually convicted of treason.
Right.
Still, he was given a sentence of 40 years. However, the thing about it was that the sentencing guidelines back then didn't require minimum sentences. In other words, nowadays, when somebody's sentenced, they get a minimum of 20 to 60 years or something like that. Back then, it was his sentence was essentially 0 to 40 years, and Daulton Lee's sentence was 0 to life, because when you look at it in the federal system, life typically means 30 years. It's sort of it doesn't mean life until you draw your last breath. It's sort of a term they assign to the sentence in the sentencing guidelines. So officially, these guys were eligible for parole from the day they went into prison. But of course, that would never happen. Nowadays, they probably would have been in prison for much longer. When Christopher Boyce escaped from prison, and after he was recaptured, he was given another 28 years. So he had essentially 68 years of time to do. And this was when he was recaptured in 1981. So yeah, no, it was a bit of a legal miracle that he was ever released, much less released after 22 years.
Do you think this is perhaps because they came from wealthy families and that they had a great legal team behind them? Well,
I don't know what, if anything, it had that them having been sort of coming from wealth had much to do with it. Andrew Daulton Lee's father was a dentist, so he did well. Christopher Boyce's father, he was not an FBI agent, as a lot of people believe, but he had worked for the FBI in security capacity. But he wasn't exactly from an affluent family, but he wasn't from a poor family either. I think the reason why these two guys got out of prison was the fact that Cait Boyce, who was just a parole advocate and a young parole advocate at that, was somebody who was very driven to help them out. And the reasons why or how she got involved in the case, are something that you might want to talk to her about. I think that a lot of it had to do with the fact that she felt in some sense that they had been given extremely heavy sentences for their age, and therefore decided that she wanted to see what she could do to help them out, not realizing that it would actually take 25 years to do so. But that's really the story of the book American Sons, is that, and that was what really drew me into the project to begin with, was the fact that here was somebody who really was not even a lawyer, but just a parole advocate, a paralegal, who got these two guys paroled who never otherwise would have seen the light of day, because there was really nobody who thought or believed that they would ever be granted parole. In the book itself, you kind of go into depth on a lot of the things that she did in preparing their parole briefs and things like that. But it was a bit of a miraculous feat.
Oh yeah,
to do something like that. Chris escaped from when he was sentenced to prison. He was sentenced to Lompoc in Southern California, which, from what I understand, in recent years, it's become something of a more laid back place. I guess as laid back as a prison can be. But at the time that he was sentenced to prison, and he ended up there around 1980 after having been at Terminal Island for some time. The place was what he described as something of a gladiator school. There were murders left and right. A lot of people in the prison, made a lot of death threats towards him, primarily for what he'd done, naturally. And he escaped from prison by essentially hiding in a drainage ditch in the activity yard through the help of somebody inside who was sympathetic to him, a fellow prisoner. And after lights out, he emerged from the drainage ditch and he climbed the fence, and he took off into the woods north of Lompoc, and was there for roughly 30 days, eating what he could find, and eventually hitchhiked his way to Santa Cruz, where another fellow, a man that he had met in prison by the name of Calvin Robinson, had told him to go if he ever got out, if he ever pulled the escape off. And at that point, he was given some assistance, and he headed north into the Idaho Panhandle, and he was there for about 18 months before the authorities caught up with him.
How long was he in prison before he made the escape?
3 years.
That's not a lot of time. And like you said, I'm sure he had a lot of threats, because a lot of these prisoners, they're patriotic, believe it or not. And yeah. A lot of them, too, believe in the death penalty. A lot of these guys are real law and order guys. You'd think that they would wake up by the time they get back there, but they're still very patriotic and they're very law and order.
Yeah.
Just amazing. But he was able to make enough friends that he was able to work this out.
Yeah, I mean, this whatever anybody may think of the crime that Chris committed, which I mean, I don't take lightly at all. I think that what he did was wrong. He thinks what he did was wrong. At one point we were talking, and he said, yeah, well, I went to prison as I should have. I broke the law. This is what I did, and I was sent to prison. But of course, that doesn't mean that once somebody is in prison that they necessarily want to stay there forever. In the case of his escaping from prison, he believed that it was sort of just a matter of time before somebody stabbed him in the back or threw him over, off a tier somewhere. I think one of the reasons why he was able to get help from some of the people inside of prison was there were some people who were sympathetic to him because for whatever you think of what he did, he's genuinely a nice guy, which is very surprising to me when I met him, because I've never met anybody, or knowingly anyway, who has been in prison or who has been in prison for that length of time. I thought that he'd be a very dark person, a morose person, a tattooed person for that matter. He has none of those things. He was somebody who was able to survive prison without becoming a worse criminal. And so he had people on the inside who were sympathetic to him and who thought, you don't belong here. What you did was a crime, but you don't belong here. And, here's what I can do to help you. And all it took was a couple of people. And it was a very, very simple escape.
Okay, let's take a little commercial break here. We're with Vince Vaughn. He's the author of American Sons, The Untold Story of the Falcon and the Snowman, based on, not based on the true story, but, it's about that famous movie with Sean Penn and Timothy Hutton. His website is thefalconandthesnowman.com. His blog is vincefont.com. His Twitter is @VinceFont. And I guess that's about it. And you can pick up his books at the falconandsnowman.com website, and also too on the Opperman Report. On all of my websites, the link is going to be on all those books as well. So we'll be right back after these messages with more of Vince Font and the untold story of the Falcon and the Snowman.
Are you ready to change your life, but don't know how to start? Is your stress and worries keeping you awake at night? Have you been battling grief, anxiety, or depression all alone? Have you lost touch with your own sense of being or spirituality? Soul Free Therapies offers professional and affordable live video streaming counseling and coaching services from the comfort of your own home. Sessions offered in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Go to our website at www.soul-free.com and book your first session today.
Hey, check out our brand new sponsor, Dynamic Solutions 2. That's the number 2. They offer a life-changing, dynamic financial solution. The finest in fast, professional, affordable credit repair. Is your credit in bad shape? Do you need a new car? Ready to buy a new house? Do you want to rent an apartment? Are you going to apply for a job? Any one of these activities, they're going to ask for a credit report and then check out your credit score. Let Dynamic Solutions 2 erase your negative credit remarks. They have affordable monthly prices. They accept Visa, MasterCard, PayPal options available. You go to www.dynamicsolutions, that's the number 2.com, or call 424-888-2820. 424-888-2820. Now, if you enter promo code ED or you mention Ed Opperman, you get a 10% discount. How's that? You get a free consultation, all negative items removed, get back in positive credit position. Dynamic Solutions 2, life-changing dynamic financial solutions. 424-888-2820. Tell them Ed Opperman sent you. You get a 10% discount.
Tina Helmuth is writing an ongoing series of fact-fiction books that boldly takes on today's most heinous crimes: the abduction, sexual trafficking, and cannibalization of our children. Suffer the Little Children, The Wrath of the Father, and Unbreakable. Deeply researched and mixed with the supernatural, good versus evil makes these thrillers hard to put down, shining a light on the root cause of these crimes and introducing a spiritual solution. Justice will be served. Available at lulu.com in paperback or ebook.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. We're here tonight with Vince Font, the author of American Sons, the Untold Story of the Falcon and the Snowman. So, Vince, you're there?
Yes, I am, Ed.
Very good. Let me ask you, a couple of things I wanted to say. One is we were talking about how he was able to get along in prison for the most part, because I found that guys who are successful outside of prison and can get along with people outside of prison when they're in prison, they get along pretty well in prison as well. Now, did he have a hard time in there from any serious trouble in there for 3 years, or the first 3 years?
Well, during the first 3 years, as I indicated before, he had seen more violence than he had ever obviously seen in his life before. He didn't have any criminal record prior to this. So he really had a completely different background from most of the people that he was incarcerated with. He had witnessed, the person next to him being murdered over some sort of a petty prison thing. A guy he jogged with was stabbed and killed because he wouldn't pay extortion for something from one of the prison gangs. So if you sort of put yourself in the position of somebody who's taken out of quote unquote normal life and then put in that sort of environment, one time he told me that he thinks that the reason why he was never attacked physically in those first 3 years was because he had a reputation that he was in there for being a spy. So everybody thought he was some sort of 007 guy who could, kill somebody with one karate chop. And he certainly did nothing to dissuade people from believing that sort of thing. In other words, he was very stoic and quiet and to himself. But there were a couple of people that he gravitated to that were, sympathetic to his plight being there. Interestingly enough, one of the things that I never knew, one of the things that I found out when I was writing the book was that when Christopher Boyce and Daulton Lee were sentenced to prison, they were sentenced to the same prison. They ultimately ended up at Lompoc in Southern California. And as I said, Chris had been to the prison at Terminal Island for some time before he was transferred. He was at the San Diego prison as well, but ended up at Lompoc. And lo and behold, there's Andrew Daulton Lee. He hadn't talked to him. Needless to say, their relationship sort of soured after they were arrested. I think both guys kind of blamed each other for getting arrested, but they had begun to rekindle their friendship, not quite to the extent that it had been before they were arrested and before they got into the whole mess of selling secrets to the Soviets. But they were able to have nice friendly chess games in one cell. And the night before Christopher Boyce escaped from prison, he approached Andrew Daulton Lee and asked him if he wanted to go with him. He had identified a spot in the prison yard that was poorly guarded, sort of the one weak spot in the prison where he saw if he could get to undetected, he could just easily climb over the fence if he cut the barbed wire. And he asked Andrew Daulton Lee, "Do you want to go with me? I'm planning on getting out of here." And Daulton Lee essentially told him, "You got me in enough trouble. I'm not going to go get myself in further trouble with you." And so he ultimately went alone. Andrew Daulton Lee was probably the last person I would have imagined to have been a model prisoner when he went to prison. But that's essentially what he was. As you saw in the movie, as depicted by Sean Penn, he was a guy who was a small-time drug dealer, a drug addict, who was probably headed to prison, would have been sent to prison at some point, even without the espionage charges. But once in there, he essentially kept to himself. He was a very small man, 5'3". So being in a place like that, he sort of had to watch where he stepped and watch what he said to anybody. And it was, he was a model prisoner, which what led to his release after 20 years, I believe.
Wait, but he also had he had drug charges too that he was a fugitive on. And was he convicted on those charges as well?
As far as I know, the drug charges that he was, a lot of the times he would be given second, third chances by judges who saw that he was somebody who came from a relatively well-to-do family and So he was able to, a lot of times, to talk his way out of, with the help of his lawyer also, when he was facing drug charges. But these were not terribly serious drug charges, but I do think that that's ultimately what led him to get a heavier sentence, was because he had a prior criminal record.
Okay, now when Boyce escapes,
Mm-hmm.
he pulls some bank robberies?
Yes, he did. He did. He was in Idaho, and he was sort of there was a community of people up there in far northern Idaho, in Bonners Ferry, Idaho, that he befriended under an assumed name, but there were some people who knew who he was. But these were people who were sort of out there, and they were there because they were just about as close to being expatriate as you can get without crossing the Canadian border. And thought, well, I'm just gonna leave it alone. I'm not gonna tell anybody who he is. Yeah, Christopher Boyce robbed some banks, and this is the one thing that when I've talked to him, he genuinely expresses regret over having done that because of the fact that he used a gun, and he understands that he probably terrified people. I've never had a gun pointed at me, but I can imagine that it's terrifying. And like I said, interestingly enough, he regrets that more than the crime of espionage itself, because of the direct impact that it had. When you ask him, why did you rob banks? His answer is, well, he couldn't get a job because he had a fake identity, and he didn't want to be discovered. He was on a lot of wanted posters. He was at the time the #1 most hunted fugitive by the U.S. Marshals. I personally think that when he climbed the fence at Lompoc, I don't think he expected to make it over the other side of the fence without being shot, because there were armed guards who were patrolling the perimeter and who had on numerous occasions shot people who'd run for the fence. I believe that once he got over the fence, he was probably so shocked that he'd actually made it, that everything after that point became some sort of almost a Robin Hood experience. I don't really know if I'm expressing it accurately.
Okay, let me ask you a couple of questions. Did he ever tell you how he got the tools to cut the barbed wire at the top of the fence?
Yes, that was really. It's actually kind of a funny story. He pulled a favor from a friend who got him a job working outside, trimming the hedges and things like that within the prison perimeter. And so he had access to these things. Okay. Yet to actually steal them required him and the person who was helping him to distract the guard. And the way they did this was by feeding the guard. The guard was apparently, really, really heavy-set guy who ate a lot of food, and they would routinely bring him pastries from the mess hall that they had bought, and said, "Here, I'm not going to eat this," and the guy would eat himself into a practical standing coma, to the point where he was distracted enough so that Chris could go back into the tool shed and steal just a pair of shears was all he used, and an old like a broom, that a half a broomstick that he had fastened into something of a makeshift ladder to help hoist him up to the top of the fence. And all these things were what he kept in, what he put underground in this little drainage ditch that had been emptied out.
Let me ask you this. Okay, he gets over the fence now. Now you're saying he spent 30 days in the woods?
Yes. Leading up to the escape, he had done his homework, and there was a yoga guy in prison. He took yoga classes from, because he knew that he needed to fold himself up into this really tight position for hours on end underground. So he took yoga. He took an art class because he wanted to make a paper mache dummy to put in his bunk, so that at night when they went by when the guards walked by the cells and saw him laying there, the dummy laying there, they would think that he was present and accounted for. What's really interesting is that at Lompoc Prison, he requested and they played for the prisoners the movie Escape from Alcatraz, which is what he essentially modeled his escape after, in a sense. And when I heard that, I had to laugh, because I thought, what prison plays a prison escape movie to prisoners?
Now, it's like playing one of those plane crash movies on an airplane.
Exactly.
Which sometimes you kind of see. They have some pretty crazy movies. And anyway, but let's get off the topic. But the thing is, now, did he have any preparation on the outside? Anybody stashing stuff for him on the other side of the fence to stay in the woods for 30 days?
No, and that was what he did. One of the other people he talked to was somebody who knew a lot about outdoor living.
Okay.
One of the prisoners. So he talked to that person, and he said, just out of curiosity, if I were living in the woods, what would I eat and what should I stay away from? And so he sort of learned these things that he needed to learn, because he knew he wouldn't be able to immediately just go into town and catch a cab. He'd have to lay low in the woods, and he was out there for a good month, and lost about 25, 30 pounds.
And he's claiming that a stranger came and picked him up hitchhiking.
No, he was okay, yeah, no, I'm sorry.
After the 30 days.
Yeah, no, he hitchhiked from Southern California all the way to Santa Cruz.
Well, then, so he comes out of the woods, right? Hasn't shaven for 30 days. Mm-hmm. He hasn't had toilet paper for 30 days, right? He's covered. He hasn't combed his hair in 30 days. But he was somehow able to get a ride?
Well, I think it's just those charming blue eyes of his.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you think? So you buy that part of the story? You don't think that maybe he had help on the outside?
I've heard I had heard theories. There's like these quote unquote conspiracy theories that at the time that the CIA had busted him out of prison because they wanted him for some secret mission, or that the KGB had been involved. And there were even some prisoners who said that they saw some mysterious black car driving around the prison on the night that he escaped. But if you ask him that, he just sort of laughs and throws up his hands and says, no, he said, I did it. I was able to do it because of the laziness of the prison guards that guarded the fence. He viewed them as, he saw them as somewhat apathetic. Granted, if they saw somebody climbing the fence, they were going to take a shot at them, but at the same time, they weren't exactly as vigilant as they could have been. He knew that if he had one opportunity to pierce the perimeter of the fence, he would be able to get through. Whereas he had the benefit of knowing where he was going to climb over the fence, and they had an entire prison to guard and couldn't know when or where somebody was going to make an attempt. It was a combination of luck that this particular part of the fence in the prison was weakly guarded. It was right below a watchtower, though. But it was also a part that wasn't as fortified as other parts of the prison were, and he identified that. And it was also, just the sort of the willingness to go through with it and decide I would rather die being shot than being shanked. And in a way, I can understand that. I've never committed a crime, and I've never been to prison or to jail or anything like that. But I think that if I were in a situation like that, I would probably want to try and do something to save myself.
So he never said to you that, okay, I had help. First of all, the conspiracy theory that the CIA or the KGB wanted it for some kind of job outside. What kind of job would they want this guy for, to do? His career working for TRW wasn't an espionage type of job. He wasn't an agent or any kind of a, soldier or security type. He was doing paperwork.
Yeah, essentially. And he was in the black vault where he had to get top secret clearance. And that was another thing too that was sort of uncovered as a result of years later, after he'd been captured and after he was sent back to prison. He was asked to testify in front of a Senate subcommittee in Washington, basically discussing espionage and some of the failings that some agencies had in hiring people. He had a lot to say about the fact that there wasn't enough of a real background check done on him. He said if they had interviewed anybody other than my parents and my priest, they would have found out that I was friends with long hairs and sort of discontented youth who smoked marijuana, and they probably would never have gotten the job. But as part of the vetting of their potential employee, the employers didn't really dig that deep Obviously, a lot of that changed after he was convicted.
But you said after his parole, he was asked to testify before Congress on a...
No, this was actually in '85 while he was in prison. He was brought to Washington, D.C. to testify.
So he did testify then?
Yeah, he did. He did. I mean, it was televised and everything. We've got some links on YouTube and on the website of the Falcon and the Snowman.com. We have a section that links out to his Senate subcommittee testimony. It's pretty compelling. I think that his testimony in front of the Senate was something that played a big factor into his eventual release, because when you watch it, he doesn't appear to be somebody who is a really hardened criminal, and he appears to be somebody who's very remorseful for what he did. In particular, obviously, the embarrassment that he brought to his family as a result. But it's pretty compelling stuff. It's hard to watch.
No, but after he was okay, how was he captured? After he escaped, how was he caught?
The short story is that one of the people that he had gotten into the business of robbing banks with turned him in and said, "This is where you can find him." The FBI and the U.S. Marshals had gone and searched in South America and Australia and all these places, and little that he was right in the United States. And it was in Port Angeles, Washington, which was one of the places he used to go from Idaho to Washington, and he'd occasionally stop off and rob a bank, but he was having a cheeseburger at a drive-in, and one of the agents who was in town, they were given a tip-off that he was in Port Angeles, Washington, and so they were sort of canvassing the area, sort of pulled in for his own hamburger, looked over and saw him sitting right next to him and said, "Oh, that's him." So they arrested him with that incident.
And was he charged with the bank robberies?
He was charged with the bank robberies. He was given another 3 years for escape. And like I said, he was given another 28 years on top of his 40-year sentence. So he had 68 years. I believe that the judge that presided over his sentencing for the bank robberies probably could have given him a stiffer sentence, but he didn't, because he just assumed, well, this guy is going to be here for the rest of his life. He'll be 93 when he gets out. So, but yeah, he went back to prison with almost 70 years left in a sentence, and the fact that he's actually was released, in all the years after I saw the movie, I never once thought to Google his name or anything, because I assumed, well, this guy is in prison, Right. I didn't find out till we sent the notes over. Yeah. You mentioned that he escaped from prison. I just found out today. Now, but in the notes you sent over too, you said something about that he was taking flying lessons and he was going to break out his buddy Daulton. Yeah, one of the things that one of the reasons, I was going to say one of the reasons he stuck around the United States, but the fact is that Chris had gone. He was able to cross into the border of Canada and then back down into Idaho. He never left the country because he felt that he would probably stick out like a sore thumb if he went to Canada, being an American. But a part of him, I don't think, wanted to leave the country. A lot of people say that. I mean, if you just Wikipedia his name, of course, a few things you read on Wikipedia are true, but it states that he was caught with a book on flying in his lap, and he was taking flying lessons at the time. The conventional wisdom at the time was that he was taking flight lessons so that he could steal a plane and fly to the Soviet Union or something. Presumably because he would be welcomed as a hero or something like that. I asked him about that, and he sort of laughed and said, "I wouldn't want to live in the Soviet Union." But the truth behind it was that he was taking flying lessons, learning how to fly a Cessna as the first step to learning how to fly a helicopter next, because he thought that was sort of like the natural progression of things. And his plan was that he was going to learn how to fly a helicopter so that he could fly the Lompoc prison like Charles Bronson and pluck Andrew Daulton Lee out of prison so they could, so he could get him out of he could break him out of prison, assuming that Daulton Lee would have been able to communicate with him to tell him, I'll be here on this date, and that he would have gone with him. Because I don't think that would have happened.
Well, at least he would be prepared, right?
Yeah,
he'd be ready. But now, it's not cheap to take flying lessons, and he was making that much money from the bank robberies.
Yeah, from what I understand, I mean, he even hit a couple of bank flights, which is, that's one of the reasons why I thought to myself, I don't think that he was necessarily. I don't think he was crazy, but I don't think he was necessarily in his right mind to actually do something like that. I don't think he had a death wish, but like I said, I don't think he was operating on Plan B, because I think Plan A was to rush the fence of the prison and die trying to escape. And when he got out, he was successful in surviving in the wilderness and making it all the way up to Idaho. But yeah, no, he actually robbed, in one case. One of the tellers was the same teller, and he would come in with disguises. First time, the young man behind the teller dropped the money or something, and he gave him his money, and he took off, and then he came back and robbed the bank again, and said, "Don't drop the money this time, please." And the teller just gave him a look like, "Oh my God, are you serious?" What's interesting though is that despite the fact that most of the people had guns pointed at them, because he had a gun in his hand when he robbed the bank. Described him as the most polite bank robber they'd ever experienced, which I hope that they've only experienced that one bank robbery, but you know what I mean?
No, actually, a lot of tellers have been through a couple of bank robberies. I've actually been online twice at the bank when the bank was robbed. Okay, back in Staten Island. And a third time, I was walking into the Staten Island Mall as it had just been robbed and they were running out. So it's a lot more common than you think. But now, let me ask you a question now. What was the average take from these bank jobs? Like $1,000, $2,000? You don't get that much.
I think it was like 5,000. And, back in, 70 or 1980, 81, that went a bit further.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, he wasn't planning on buying a plane. He was planning on, or not buying a plane, buying a helicopter. He was planning on borrowing one. But yeah, he was taking.
Yeah, that's another thing too. Yeah, it's not that easy to rent a helicopter or a plane. You need at least a credit card to pull that off. He didn't have a credit card, right?
No, he didn't have a license or anything. He relayed a story to me one time where he was pulled over somewhere in Idaho or Washington. I don't remember where, but he was pulled over by a state trooper and asked for his license, and he basically coolly told the man, "Well, I'm sorry, I don't have one. I come from Alaska, and in Alaska, in this small village or town that I live in, we don't really do those kinds of things." And the officer let him go on his way, not knowing that he had just encountered one of the most wanted fugitives in the country. So
he never managed to get any kind of fake ID when he was out on the run?
He did operate under a couple of fake names, but I don't know that he actually had a fake driver's license that he could have fooled a cop with.
Okay. Well, back in those days, it was pretty easy to get a fake driver's license. You could just, there was a lot of little tricks you could do. One guy would take the picture and another guy would walk over and get the license, So it was pretty common in those days. Yeah. Okay, well, let's take a commercial break. We're here with Vince Font, the author of American Sons, The Untold Story of the Falcon and the Snowman. And his website is...
FalconandtheSnowman.com.
Thank you. Because if you had a podcast, you know what I'm going through here. You're looking through the notes and stuff. You know what I'm dealing with. All right, we'll be right back after these messages with more of Vince Font, the author of American Sons, The Untold Story of the Falcon and the Snowman. And now a word from our sponsors. OppermanReport.com. Hey, do you like what you're hearing? Do you like the work that you see us doing here at Opperman Report? You can support that work by becoming a member at OppermanReport.com. And as you have access to over 200 exclusive shows and interviews that you can't find on YouTube or Spreaker or iHeart or iTunes or KYAH. You can't find them anywhere else online, exclusive to our member sections, to our members. Also, too, there's images, videos, documents, court docs. And don't forget, you can hear your ad played here on the Opperman Report, reach hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people on a daily basis because the show is repeated every day all over the world. Contact me at oppermanreport@gmail.com and I'll give you a good deal on advertising rates.
Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Maybe the facility you manage could establish new revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services. Cart King International can be the answer to your needs. Cart King is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile coffee, food, and retail carts and kiosks. Cart King has been working with clients and corporations across North America for 20 years, providing innovative designs, custom manufacturing, and timely delivery. Carts and kiosks are fun, and so are the dozens of designs on our website. Please visit us today at www.cart-king.com or just call us at 1-877-986-7771 and get your sales rolling.
Have you ever heard of Castile Soap? Pure Soap Flake Company handcrafts fine soap bars, laundry powder, and concentrated soap flakes using organic vegetable oils from their northern Minnesota facility. Bathe your body and wash your clothes with pure soap products that are free of fragrance, GMOs, palm oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, and synthetic additives, safe for drains and waterways, and work great in high-efficiency washers and top and front-loading machines. They have a little promotion going on. Contact them to order some soap. Mention the Opperman Report. You're going to get a free gift. Order today at puresoapflakes.com or give them a call, 218-568-2525, 218-568-2525. Pure Soap Flake Company is a proud member of the Handcrafted Soap and Cosmetic Guild.
Are you ready to change your life, but don't know how to start? Is your stress and worries keeping you awake at night? Have you been battling grief, anxiety, or depression all alone? Have you lost touch with your own sense of being or spirituality? Soul Free Therapies offers professional and affordable live video streaming counseling and coaching services from the comfort of your own home. Sessions offered in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Go to our website at www.soul-free.com and book your first session today.
Is your credit in bad shape? Do you need a new car? Ready to buy a new house? You want to rent an apartment? Are you going to apply for a job? Any one of these activities, they're going to ask for a credit report and then check out your credit score. Let Dynamic Solutions 2 erase your negative credit remarks. They offer a life-changing, dynamic financial solution. The finest in fast, professional, affordable credit repair. They have affordable monthly prices. They accept Visa, MasterCard, PayPal options available. You go to www.dynamicsolutions2, that's the number 2.com, or call 424-888-2820. Now, if you enter promo code ED or you mention Ed Opperman, you get a 10% discount. How's that? You get a free consultation, all negative items removed, get back in positive credit position. Dynamic Solutions 2, life-changing dynamic financial solutions.
Hey you, podcast listener, this is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. Take the blue pill. You wake up in your bed and go back to listening to mundane podcasts that won't challenge your religious beliefs and your so-called truths about reality, the universe, and consciousness. Take the red pill. Subscribe to the Event Horizon podcast, hosted by Mark Anthony Peterson, and he will show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Event Horizon takes a walk into the paranormal with a splash of conspiracy. It's the podcast that would be born if David Icke and the X-Files had a baby. Subscribe to the Event Horizon podcast by Mark Anthony Peterson on Spreaker, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Stitcher, or any of your other favorite podcast platforms. Remember, all we are offering is the truth, nothing more.